For those of you that don't know me, my name is John Holcomb. I work here at Georgia Farm Bureau in our Information and Public Relations Department. I specifically spend most of my time, as many of you in the room have probably seen me, carrying around a camera, working for our TV show, The Farm Monitor, that is produced by Georgia Farm Bureau and airs all over the state on GBB, as well as on RFD TV a couple of nights a week. Actually, it changed, so a morning and a night per week. But I also produce and host this show, this podcast, Georgia Farm Bureau's Growing On podcast. And as I said, this is the first year this is the first time actually ever that we're doing this live recording of this podcast. And so just as a token of appreciation, I just want to extend my gratitude to Levi Davis and the YFNR committee for the opportunity to do this. But yeah, let's get started. So we today are going to be talking about succession planning, which was a topic selected by the committee. But before we get into that, I'm going to introduce these two guys up here that are going to be talking with me about this today. The first is Taylor Broun. He is a attorney with James Bates, Bannon and Groover. He specializes in estate, tax planning, and general business law. And then to his left, we have Garrett Hurley, which many of you, I'm sure, know. He is District 1 YFNR Committee Chair, as well as a diversified row crop producer in Chattooga County. So, like I said, before we dive in, let's let these guys introduce themselves. Let's start with you, Taylor.
Okay. And as John mentioned, my name is Taylor Broun. I'm from Athens, Georgia, and went to UGA undergrad, go Dogs, and then went to law school at Charleston School of Law in Charleston, South Carolina, and then also got my LLM at Emory University in corporate law and tax law, and have been practicing law for about 14 years now. And like many of you here in the room, I've got a young family at home, and so it's a joy for me to be able to help young families plan for their businesses and also plan their estate planning to help pass on a legacy to their children and their families.
Awesome. What about you, Garrett?
Yeah, my name's Garrett Hurley. I'm from up in Chattooga County. I'm not going to say that we are the farthest away from Jekyll here today, but there's not going to be many that's further away from home than we are today. So we're in the very northwest corner of Georgia. Most people have no idea where Chattooga County is. So I've always been involved in agriculture. I'm a fifth generation on our home farm. My kids will be the sixth. I've got both of them here today. Me and my wife Sarah serve as District 1 chairpeople on the state committee. I can never remember a time that Farm Bureau was not a part of my life.
Awesome. All right, so let's dive right in. We're going to start with Taylor, since he is the professional here when it comes to estate planning and things like that. So, Taylor, the first question for you. Let's dive into when we say estate planning, when we say succession planning, what is it? What is it exactly?
So succession planning is really just it's a process, and I want to emphasize that it is a process. It's not just a one-time thing that you set up, but it's a plan that a family and business owners put together to plan for the future transition of that business and who the leaders of that business will be in the future and the ownership of that business will be in the future. And it can look very different for each individual family, each individual business, because no one family is alike and no one business is alike. And so that process can just be very different depending on what each family's goal is and each business goal is, whether they want to try to build a business to sell it, or if they have a multi-generational business that they're looking to pass on to the next generation. That'll affect how they want to plan for the future, and it's just extremely important because it serves for it kind of determines what legacy to leave behind for the next generation. It also determines who's going to lead the business in the future, and then also can serve as a risk management in the event that there's like an untimely death or permanent disability or something like that. That if, a well thought out succession plan can help with all of those situations.
Awesome. So Garrett is here today, not as an expert, but as someone that has a firsthand experience of the importance of not only succession planning, but a clear path of succession planning. So Garrett, talk to us about your story, about why you're up here on this stage today.
Yeah, so this whole deal kind of started with me joking. If you know me, I cut jokes all the time and always got something going, but I made the comment that I can tell people how not to do a succession plan. And what I mean by that is I had a firsthand experience on my family farm on that generational land that I spoke of earlier. We were in limbo of whether the land that surrounded my house that me and my wife built was going to stay in our family or not. So taking my story all the way back to 1983, not my story, but my family's story. My dad's dad died 1983, and he was like 53. My dad was 19, so he had a lot of growing up to do in a short amount of time. So they kind of come together. My granddad and my uncle were farming together. They were partners in everything. My dad just stepped up to the plate and took my granddad's spot. So my uncle and my dad farmed together, and fast forward about 30 years, I graduated high school. My entire life, I never wanted to do anything but farm. I guess I just really didn't know what it was going to take for me to actually farm, but I was the biggest carpet farmer there ever was. I never played sports. I never did anything, but whenever I was a kid, I played with tractors, I farmed. Whenever I was a teenager, FFA, farming, and I guess I'm still here today. I'm a farmer, true and true. But I say that I graduated in 2013. I was contemplating going to college, decided that I wanted to farm. So my uncle was starting to age some. They needed some help around the farm, so I come back to the farm just as kind of just an entry-level farmhand, is all you could say. It was kind of under the impression that I was going to work until he got ready to quit or something happened, and he was going to help me transition into ownership of the farm. So I graduated in high school in 2013. Started taking sort of along about 2018. I started making a fair amount of the decisions on the farm, seed selections, chemical applications, you name it. I had a hand in it. In 2021, my uncle's health started degrading rapidly. He found out that he had stage 4 cancer in May, and in September he passed away. So there we were, left with, what do we do? I often described it as, we seen a train coming down the tracks, the light was shining on us, but we wasn't smart enough to get off the tracks. And that train run us over, is all we can say. We found out after his death that he had a will drawn up 2 days before his death. And it was a very generic will that said, I want all of my assets divided equally between my 2 grandkids. It didn't say how to divide them or if he wanted anything kept together, any of the farmland kept together. But I might add that in the entire operation, him and my daddy were 50-50 partners on the entire operation. from the land to the cows, you name it, they were business partners on it. No sort of operating agreement or any sort of paperwork. It was always, they just farmed, put the money in the bank account at the end of the year, and did it the next year. And if they needed something, they wrote it out of that bank account. So that created a real problem. So a few days after we found out about the will, the executor that was listed on the will started showing up wanting to know what all these assets were. They had no idea what was involved in the operation, where crops were planted, how many cows were where, the acreage, or even where some of the tracts of land were. So this, we had many meetings with lawyers. We met with lawyers, and thankfully, after a lot of prayer and mental and physical, I guess, beat up, I guess that's all you can say is, I was literally, my entire life was on the line, or I felt like it was. I felt like my identity was that farm at the time. Like I said, our house sat in the middle of our home farm, and it was up in limbo whether that piece of property was going to stay in a Hurley name or not. We were looking at the worst case scenario of calling an auction company, having them come sell it all, and we were going to buy what we could back. Thankfully, after a lot of that prayer, trial, not a court trial, but prayer and the trial of this happening, we were able to come to some sorts of agreement that of the way things would be split up. Thankfully, we were able to sell off part of the cows, keep a cow herd. The equipment was appraised. I was able to get a loan for the equipment to pay the estate for the equipment. And the land was able to, they were able to come to agreement on some of the timber land, and ended up being able to keep all the farmland. So so I'm here on the case of everything worked out at this point, but there was a period of time that we had no idea the future of whether I would be farming or my two kids would even have a chance to step on the same land that I was raised on.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I think, it sounds like, at least from what you're talking about, that's the end result seems to be good, but unfortunately that's not the case for everybody, for sure.
Yes.
So that kind of transitions us to the next part of this, right? With so many instances of that happening, my family is similar situation. I'm sure it happens all the time, honestly. But Taylor, I'm going to point to you for this question. I'm going to go to you first, at least. But why is the challenges for this for farm families? Why? Obviously, with this happening so much, there's an issue there. What challenges? What are those challenges that allow this to be such a status quo, I guess, for lack of a better word, problem for farm families?
At least where I see it the most is one of the biggest challenges I see there is just the lack of communication with the family as a whole. I can't stress enough how important it is for families to communicate about how they want to be able to pass on their business as they're coming up for a plan for their business, and to continue to talk about that, not just one time or two times, but like over several years as the business changes and evolves. They need to continue talking about it, and as family dynamics change and evolve, you got to continue to discuss it and continue to have meetings about it so that you can ensure successful transition in your business. And some other factors that kind of cause challenges is kind of what I call the tyranny of the urgent, which is people put phone calls, you got your meetings, your other business issues. This kind of get put in front of planning for the future of the business, and so that succession planning kind of gets put on the back burner, and then sometimes never gets come back around to talk about. There's also issues in family dynamics with multi-generational farms where you have some family members that are really interested and want to be a part of the business, and then others don't. And there's questions about well, how do I take care of my children that aren't interested in being in the farm, but also be fair to the child that has been working on the farm and is going to be running the farm. And then also, how can I take, if you have a spouse that's involved, and how do I take care of them as well? So there's just a lot of challenges that you have to navigate through, and it is a long process. And again, it is a process. It's not just a one-time thing, and that's where it just gets difficult, because just keeping up with that.
Do you find, just from like the stories that I've heard, do you find that for whatever reason it seems to be a taboo topic? I mean, like in the sense of, it's like no one wants to touch it. Like, what do you think? Like, is it just the awkwardness of the conversation a lot of times that you see, or just there's just a lot of emotion because of just maybe attachment to the land, or whatever it may be? I don't. What do you, from what you see, what do you think?
I mean, I think it can be a very difficult topic to talk about, because in a lot of instances you're talking about, okay, the death of the owner and what's going to happen with your family after that. And then it's also, a lot of families see it as, okay, this is how we've always done it. This is how the business has always been ran. We're not going to do it differently. And I mean, that can cause a problem, because if you don't make a plan, then in the future, it can end up being more fights with your family and be more costly from a financial standpoint to your family, to have to fight it out in court on who's going to get certain property and who's going to be running the business and things like that. So,
and to add on to that, that is sort of that train that I was talking about coming down the tracks. Is I was basically in a comfortable spot where I was at. Didn't have the debt load. We were planting a crop, gathering a crop. Everything was clicking along. Had we had that communication aspect of this and had that hard conversation and actually nailed something down, I wouldn't have went through that year of stress, both physically, financially, and mentally.
Gotcha. I mean, I agree. I think a lot of things, honestly, a lot of conflict could always be avoided with just, if we could just communicate as humans. And I think it's, especially as, Southerners, more reserved people, it's those topics can be hard to approach, I feel like, because of the emotion behind it and, whatnot. But for you, Garrett, to piggyback on what Taylor just was talking about with the challenges, you describe it as a train coming down the tracks that you could see and didn't move. What were those challenges that you can look back on maybe now and think, oh, why couldn't we have done it then, I guess? Yeah.
So, had there been some of those documents put into place, some of the, if we would have been, even had an LLC set up, we would have been able to transfer some of those assets whenever we realized that his health was declining so rapidly. So now, in our operation, so me and my dad, we are 50-50 partners on everything in our operation, but we run under an LLC, and we both own shares in that LLC. And hopefully, whenever he gets ready to transition, that'll be a little easier transitional process for us, and that everything just being up in the air won't be a question anymore.
Gotcha. Kind of a good segue into our next part of this is establishing a plan, right? Establishing a way of succession for the family farm or the operation itself. Taylor, what are those key components of that plan that farmers and farm families in these operations could really benefit from to kind of avoid a situation like Garrett's talking about?
I think one of the key things, again, is just communication, but then also putting pen to paper and coming up with some key core documents that will help in your planning. And some of those things would be, having a good will or trust, putting together an LLC putting your farm in an LLC and having a good operating agreement that explains in the operating agreement how the leadership and the ownership of the farm will transition in the event of somebody's death or in the event of disability or retirement. But I think those are probably some of the main things. And then especially with the wills and trusts, because you can kind of determine with a good will or trust, you can convey your wishes on to be put in place about who's going to receive certain assets, who will be in charge of your business, what assets will you give to others in your family that aren't necessarily involved in the business. And then, there's a lot of times people get a little too comfortable thinking, okay, well, I've got a will, and it may be a simple will, which is better than nothing. But also, there's a lot of times where the will is just like, to my spouse. Well, then there's problems with that as well, because your assets aren't necessarily protected from creditors if it's just to the spouse, because the spouse doesn't have protection. Also, if you're in a young family and something were to happen and that business goes to your spouse, they could get remarried, and that may not stay in your family. So having a more complex will can be helpful in that situation, because you can plan through trust, where you can plan for the benefit of the spouse during their lifetime, but then also determine who eventually that business and who those assets will go to in the future if you want to stay with your family and stay with your children and things like that. So I would say having a good will is probably the first step of anything in succession planning.
Okay. Garrett mentioned like an LLC. How, and obviously you're the expert here, but how beneficial is that in these situations?
I think it's extremely beneficial, because that also provides a contractual agreement on how the business will be run and who will be in charge of that business, and it also provides protection of your assets as well. And a lot of people think to do an LLC, you have to have multiple members, but you can even do it with a single member LLC, and then potentially put that membership interest into a trust, so that you have a trustee. If whenever something happens or something changes, that the trustee would then have a plan on how that interest needs to get passed on to the next generation. LLCs also are beneficial because you can kind of change the classifications of shares in LLC. You can have non-voting shares and voting shares, so that when you're ready to transition, whether it's during your lifetime or at the death of the owner, they can transition, the voting shares to the next leader, and they'll have, the voting rights, and then they may have the ability to change the equity shares and the non-voting shares to their family members who may not be involved in the business, but they also want to take care of them and get benefits from the business, but not have a say in how the business is run. So there's a lot of flexibility in having an LLC and having your business in an LLC.
Awesome. As maybe anybody here listening, or anybody that's listening to this elsewhere, as they hear you speak, as they hear this topic, and maybe begin to think about the process of succession planning and estate planning, whatnot, what have you, what are maybe some myths or misconceptions that they may have? I feel like I hear people say all the time, well, I'm too young, or that's just expensive. But in reality, tragedy can strike at any time, and nothing is more expensive than going to a court battle with, someone over property that you have rights to. So I'll let you kind of answer that one, Taylor. Speaking
as far as to being I'm too young, I totally disagree with that, because I think you've got to think about, in the now, what happens if I were to die tomorrow? And then what is going to happen with my family, and how do I plan for that kind of situation of my family? Are they going to have to sell the business that I have? Are there any kind of debts that the business has that's going to have to be taken care of? Which, one thing I think is a really good thing that, especially as as a young business owner to look into, right, and is life insurance, because life insurance can help with taking care of certain debts and also taking care of your family members. And it can be used as a planning tool as well in the future to, if you do like a whole life plan that can be borrowed money off of for your business and other things like that. And then from the too expensive standpoint, yeah, it is a high cost, but it is something that I think in the long run is worth it. And I can tell you from my experience as a young attorney, when I was first starting out, I was doing my own taxes, was doing my own financial, what I would call financial planning, was just putting it in a savings account. And ended up actually meeting with an actual financial advisor, started working with a CPA, and they saved me so much money, and actually I had to where I could keep more money for savings and for my family by spending that little extra cost to meet with them and to work with them. And so I think it's really important to have a good advisory team for your business, like having a CPA and a financial advisor you work with, an attorney you work with that all know each other and work together and can work with you on your plan together.
Garrett, I'm gonna kind of toss to you now in this same regard. Obviously with the experience that you had, I have a feeling that you're probably going to do things a little differently after experiencing that. But you do have 2 young kids, as you mentioned, and as you think about that, how relatable is and I guess urgent, I guess, is that for you now, and maybe the message to anybody out there that has that misconception of I'm too young, or maybe I'll do it later type scenario?
Yeah, so in my scenario, like you said, I've got 2 kids and a wife that she has her own career. So not that she's not involved in the farm, but she's not involved in the day-to-day operations. So if something was to happen to me, or something was to happen to me and my dad at the same time, she would be absolutely lost with what to do. So I do carry an insurance policy to cover my debt and to give them some sort of security to hopefully get them until they're out of school to kind of go on their own. But I would like to add on to that, we're sitting here talking about a succession plan of business, of a farm, but it's something to think about even if just you as an individual, of who's going to take care of things whenever something does happen to you, whether it just be you by yourself, or if you've got a wife and a few kids, wife, husband, whatever it might be, spouse. It is something that needs to be looked at of, what's going to happen if, we all think that we're going to live forever, but literally we could fall over dead just like that. We're never promised, the next breath of air that the Lord blesses us with. So I just encourage the side of, hey, no matter whether you're looking at a multi-million-dollar business, or if you're looking at, yourself personally, and you're looking at your 401k, you've got a house, you think about passing away and your spouse is needing to pay bills, they don't have access to your bank account. You could be months away from getting access to that bank account. And that sounds really elementary, but there is instances where, a widow ends up with not enough money to buy groceries for the sole fact of she didn't have access to the bank account. So I say that to say, don't just look at this as a broad spectrum of, I don't need that because I don't have a business. Look at it as you're an individual. There's one thing that's for sure. We're going to die and we're going to pay taxes. Be sure you've got them taken care of.
That's hilarious. All right, we only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to kind of wrap us up here. For you, Taylor, for someone in the audience that's listening that doesn't have a plan, that maybe wants to start one, how do how do they start to do that? How does someone start to approach this topic or approach this conversation with their family, to get this ball rolling here?
I think it's just be willing to have the tough conversation. Talk with your spouse, talk with your relatives if they're involved in a multi-generational family. Have those conversations because it's important to the future of that family and to the legacy that you're going to leave to your family. And then the other thing would be just to, again, I would advise having an advisory team, and this is a little self-serving, but to say reach out to an attorney to talk to about it that works in this area and that practices in that area, because they can be helpful in advising you on the steps you need to take and who else you need to talk to. I would also talk to other farmers that you may know that have gone through succession planning and get some some of their thoughts and their experiences and how they went through it, and if they went through a successful succession planning.
Awesome. And to wrap us up, Garrett, I'm going to ask you this. If you could do it differently, if you could go back and do something differently with your family situation, what do you think that would look like in terms of approaching that?
Yeah, so quite honestly, I just wish we would have had those tough conversations. And I know we've said a lot while we've been up here, but I think that could possibly be the key takeaway of what you take away from this past 30 minutes is everybody in here, our plan is going to look different. But the one thing that's not going to be different is actually getting started, actually initiating that conversation, that communication so there is not any expectations or disappointments later in life. And that kind of sounds, childish a little bit maybe, but it has to start, and you can be the one that starts the conversation.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you both for doing this today. I really appreciate your time. Taylor, thanks for making the drive down for conference. Thank you all for listening and sitting in on this discussion. It was a great one, and I really enjoyed the experience. So have a great rest of your conference, and I'll turn it back over to Cole. All right, that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening to the Growing On podcast. If you haven't done so already, please rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. That would be greatly appreciated. And as always, be on the lookout in the coming weeks for our next episode. Take care, everybody.